Hi, my name is Jamie Grundy. I'm an independent educator, trainer and researcher specialising in the field of criminal justice. This is Me and My Convictions, Part 2. So hopefully you've watched Part 1 and have felt suitably enthused to come back and see the second side of it. And essentially this film is all about supporting those people who've got previous convictions and what they may need to tell an employer. So this film really deals with how to disclose this information. You'll hear that word quite a bit, disclosure or disclose, and it's how best to do that. It includes some little suggestions of good ways to handle this information and the best way to deal with that process. And it's also really important because what the idea behind doing it right is that it helps an employer to see you and your potential, so that you can present the best version of yourself, which is really important, especially if you're in an interview. So disclosure, how to disclose the fact that you may have a criminal conviction. In the first film, if you've had a look at that, we'll have had a look at whether you're obliged to disclose or not, and is it relevant, or if the conviction is unspent. There will be some of the things that you'll be talking about there, but I'd urge you to go back and check out the first film and understand a little bit more about this process. But basically, if you're going for a particular role with an organisation, every recruitment process is different. I know we're encouraged to apply through online sites, whether it be, Indeed, for example, or Total Jobs or whatever, and you fill out one form. But really, every job is a little bit different to the other. So it's really important, if you're going to go for work anywhere, to try and understand that individual recruitment process as best you can. I'd urge you to check out a website called Glassdoor. I'll make sure that the address is on the website now, because that will give you a little bit of information about how you can find out a bit more about that organisation and whether you think you'd like to work there. Pretty useful. But essentially, if you're going to be going for a role and you have to disclose, because we know that the recruitment process says that it does, and we've gone through that, and because maybe your conviction is unspent and you need to disclose, how best to do that. The golden rule really in terms of disclosure is disclosing at the earliest possible stage. Why is that important? Well, in the first instance, it's probably going to help you because you won't feel like you're hiding anything. There's not going to be that kind of weight on your shoulder that might be dragging you down a little bit. If you can get it off your chest so that all your cards are on the table, it's going to allow a potential employer to see you, the full picture all about you, so they can make an informed decision that way. Essentially, there are two different kinds of roles that you could be going for. So if a particular role says that a check will be carried out, it's probably going to be a DBS check, a criminal records check. So they should ask you to do that check before the interview. If they don't, then I would probably suggest that you do disclose the fact that there's a conviction there before the interview. So that it's not going to be a bit of a surprise to them. Then they might have some questions that they might want to ask at that point. So if you can disclose at the earliest possible point, it shows that you've been upfront and being forthright and being honest with them, which is pretty important. Some roles have more of a sort of like a tick box, and they'll wait until the interview. But what some people tend to do at this stage is they'll tick no, that they don't have any disclosure or they don't have any conviction. And then they hope to explain at the interview. But unfortunately, what you have just demonstrated, if you were to follow that particular process, at the first stage, the earliest possible point that you can, is that you've lied to a potential employer. And if an employer is looking for trustworthy individuals, which, let's face it, most employers want, the earliest possible stage, you've just given a potential example of untrustworthiness. And for some employers, that may well be a reason why not to employ you. So I would always urge you to tick that you have a conviction there, rather than ticking no and hoping to explain at the interview. It's also not advised to do that if you're on probation, if you're on licence or on any particular barred list. It's really not a good idea there as well. Other ways that you can apply for work are things like CVs that often go along with a covering letter. And that's brilliant because they're a great opportunity for you to really sell yourself, talk about your best side, your strengths, your positive experiences, why you're really the best candidate that they can have. you can put a lot of thought into it, and you can really focus in on those positive strengths and experience that you've had, whether it's in education, whether it's in volunteering, or whether it's life experience. You can really make a big deal of that. It gives you a great opportunity to sell yourself into the experience and also the qualifications that you've got. And you can also put down on those CVs experience that you've got while you're in prison. For people who've been in prison, you'll know that no prison is able to operate without the prisoners inside. And that's not necessarily that there wouldn't be anybody to lock up, but prisoners are used as cleaners, as educators, as orderlies for induction or in the gym, working in the kitchens, all kinds of prison industry that go on. So no prison works without prisoners. And for all the people who do those particular roles and all those particular jobs in prison, what that gives you is experience that you can show to a potential employer that if you were in prison, you didn't just see your time through, you really made the best use of your time, you got some experience behind you, you've got some skills, quite a lot of time there will be qualifications, for example, like NEBOSH. So you've got something there that you can take to a potential employer to say, hey, okay, this happened, but look at what I got out of it. That's really, really important. What I would say about CVs and covering letters, that's not normally the place where you would be disclosing about prior convictions. I'm going to come on to why not. So now you're saying to me, okay, Jamie, what's the best way to disclose? Well, think to yourself, think about it in this way. What would an employer maybe want to know if they're going to employ a person with a conviction? They're going to know things like, can you tell me about your criminal record? Why did you commit the offence? Was there anything happening in your life at the time? How can I be sure you're not at risk? Probably a big one. What steps have you taken to change your ways? And how is your life different now? They're the sort of things that an employer is going to want to know. There's going to be all kinds of other questions about whether you can physically do the job, whether you've got the right competencies, whether you're the right candidate for the role. But if in terms of talking about convictions, they're the main things that a potential employer is going to want to know. So best practice on here is to write something called a disclosure statement. And this basically is a simple piece of paper, one side of A4, which gives brief factual details about your conviction. So although it might be really, really strike close to your heart, try to rein in your urge to write loads and loads of information about it. You know, employers have often only got a limited amount of time, especially an interviewer, and they want to be able to focus in on the main points about that conviction. So keep it short, one side of A4. Keep a copy, that's really important. Even if you don't use a paper copy in the interview or the disclosure process, and it's just in there, it's a really good tool that you can go back and read through and understand every single point. If you're going to submit a physical copy, like a paper copy for the role, personalise it for the role that you're applying for. So, if I was the employer, write it down. Dear Mr. Grundy, I'm interested in the role of, and then put the role down that you're there. It shows to me as an employer that you've taken a little bit of time and taken a little bit of thought over this. Keep it simple, keep it easy to understand. Don't use jargon in there, don't use prison jargon like, Cat B, Cat C, Cat D, Rottle. Don't use jargon on there. Just keep it simple and plain and easy to understand. Get support in terms of writing it. So if you've got a support worker or a probation officer, get their support in terms of asking them to read over it. If you've got an employment advisor, ask them to have a look at it. If you've got a family member, ask them to have a look at it. By a process of other people looking at it, there may be things in there that you have maybe forgotten about that they would suggest putting in there. They'll also be able to tell if it's a little bit waffly, if it needs to be a bit tighter. Also, the more people that look at it, the more people will have, will maybe pick up on things like typos, or maybe, you've got the incorrect grammar there or something like that. So don't be afraid of showing it to other people to get their perspective on it. That's really useful. If you have to send it in, if you've got to post it in, find out who the right person is to send it to. Put that on the envelope and mark it confidential. Don't just send it in with something like to whom it may concern. Write the person's name on it, write confidential. It's important, it's your information. You need to make sure it gets through to the right person and is dealt with in the right way. At the bottom of that letter, I would also offer to meet with them to discuss any concerns, because it's not normal to receive a disclosure statement, but I think it shows that you're honest and open as a person, and there may well be questions and they would like to discuss those things with you. So offer to meet to discuss any concerns that you may have. In terms of the structure, I would suggest something called the SH1T sandwich. That's right, the sandwich. The reason I call it the SH1T sandwich is because just like that kind of sandwich, you've got the good stuff, the bread at the top, the first thing that you encounter, then you've got the SH1T in the middle, and then you've got the bread underneath the other good stuff. So structure it like that. First section of your disclosure statement, talk about why you're interested in the role, why you think you will be a really good candidate for that particular organisation, for that particular job. The second bit, the SH1T, talk about what happened, explain when it happened, and talk about the context for what it happened. Only make it, 3 or 4 sentences, no more than 1 paragraph. Finally, talk about how you've learned from that experience, how you've moved on, and crucially, how your life is different now. The reason I suggest using that SH1T sandwich as a good practice guide for writing a disclosure statement is because the first and last impressions of that potential employer will have about you are going to be positive, and that is so important. So make sure you frame it in that way. So hopefully through this little short film, I've given you a few little pointers there. I've given you a few pointers about how best to disclose and when to disclose to a potential employer and what that might be. I've hopefully given you a few pointers about how the employer can see the potential in you and how you can show that you're the best version of you that you could possibly be. And why is that important? Well, because you want to give yourself every bit of a fighting chance that you can when you're going for a particular role. And don't be afraid of being honest in that, but keep it structured, keep it factual, and use that SH1T sandwich in terms of the disclosure. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you're going to get a great deal out of it, and best of luck going forward. Thank you.